gone past 1 o'clock, 1:01. Thank you, Doug, for turning up. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee. Just remind people that are coming in and out, there is a COVID app at the back of the door where people are supposed to swipe in if they haven't. I guess for the rest of the team that are here, it'll be recorded in the minutes that we were here. There's no public forum and no apologies, so I'll move the apologies, or there's no apologies. So, confirmation of the agenda. I'd like to move from the Chair that we confirm the agenda with the following that in regards to Standing Order 21.4, Option C be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments. Thank you, Councillor Staines. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All in favour say aye. Aye. I'd like to remind members of their declaration of interest. And Councillor Fiso, did you have an alteration?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm no longer a member of the DMEC Management Committee.
Thank you. Is there any other? You got that, Wendy? Any other changes or notifications? Okay, well, with that, I note and amend the proposed management plan for elected members. Seconder, Councillor Hall. All those in favour say aye. Against? No, that's carried. Thank you. Now, Part A reports. Mr Davey, the Waipori Fund. And Gemma as well. Thank you. Would you like to preface with any comments or just straight to questions?
Yeah, I'll make a couple of comments. The fund had a good quarter, up 7.6%.
Could you just pull your mic a wee bit closer, please, Richard?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the fund had a good quarter, up 7.6% versus a negative quarter in the March quarter. Equity markets rebounded strongly, up close to 40% in the quarter, and the fund continues to perform well with the recovery.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Councillor Geary. Oh, sorry. Councillor Hawkins. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about, and obviously this report would have been prepared in advance of that, but the ongoing security issues at the NZX, whether that presents a risk to us or to the fund in any way that you're aware of?
I don't think it does present a risk to the fund. It's a temporary problem which they're working to resolve.
Councillor Geary.
Mr Davey, on page 20 under Outlook, it talks about a potential cloud on the horizon, the tensions between the US and China. In terms of the US elections in November, what impact do you see that having?
As far as elections and so forth, always present challenges to markets, but I think in the long run, the fund continues to be managed conservatively and has performed well over the long term. The long run return is 7.9%. It will continue to perform well given the conservative management of the fund.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you for the report, Mr Davey. Just one question. I think I've asked this previously. Is there any reason why, when we get the breakdown of the Waipori Fund, we don't have actually a list of the equities that we hold? Is there any particular reason that that can't be given to us?
There's no reason why it's not included. We can include it going forward, and we can provide you with that list shortly if you'd like.
And I guess another question, again in the Outlook where it's suggested that the equity markets have rebounded potentially too fast, too quickly. Have you any sort of innate feeling in New Zealand at the moment as to where one would put spare cash, other than in equities?
Yeah, I suppose, well, in terms of the fund, we have talked about the asset allocation and that we have received advice on the asset allocation and that it is appropriate given the outlook to markets. But I suppose talking about where to put cash in general, it's probably getting away a little bit from the context of the report at this time.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. It's really good. I enjoy it. I was just looking at page 20, the asset allocation and short-term deposits and fixed interests, given they are low, but I do know it's a conservative fund, so can you make commentary on that?
Yes, it is conservatively managed, and the proportion of funds invested in fixed interest and income assets was 51.9%. That's appropriate at the current time. Interest rates are still predicted to go lower, and on the fixed income investments, as interest rates go lower, we'll make capital gains on those assets as interest rates do go lower. But we do continue to look to reinvest short-term deposits as they mature into other fixed interest assets with appropriate returns.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Davey, for those answers. The one question I had was on page 19, the property equities. I see that both the benchmark and ourselves have been positive territory, but for the full year we're still negative for the property equities. Now, do you know the breakdown of what those equities are? Are they commercial or farmland or all sorts of properties? And why has that performed so poorly when other property seems to be doing so well?
Yeah, the property assets will be made up of, say, 4 to 6 names. Commercial property, it's not farmland or anything like that. They tend to be commercial office buildings and so forth. In terms of that negative number for the year versus the benchmark, I'd have to look into that more closely with the individual holdings to answer that one.
Will they traditionally be all held in New Zealand, or will it be a mixture of international and Australian properties as well?
All the property equities are New Zealand equities.
Yep, okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm willing to move that from the chair, that we note the Waipori Fund. Seconded Councillor Hall. Any discussion? Oh well, that's another good year. I'll put the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you. Item 6, Council Financials. Financial result for the year ended 30th of June 2020. Mr Logie will be taking the questions. Any questions? Actually, I'll hold that thought. Did you have anything you'd like to speak to the report first? Sorry, Gavin.
Probably just to reference that, obviously, if you go to page 23, which provides a summary of the full year result, obviously income's been impacted by the things we've talked about previously, but also obviously the COVID lockdown period in April and May. Capital expenditure is interesting, so we ended up at 92.3 for the year. Obviously that was below budget for a number of reasons, but if you compare it to last year at 101, given that we were out of action for a month, and last year's included a couple of property purchases of around $4 or $5 million each, then actually this year's not too bad relative to last year, which I think is quite positive. Obviously our borrowings are short of budget, and that's again a reflection of the fact that our capex is lower, partially offset by the fact that we've had that shortfall in revenue.
Thank you very much. Now, I see a couple of hands, or I see 3. Councillor Geary, you were first.
Well, thank you. Page 37, just a minor point, Mr Logie, but the mobility solutions, it's about the 4th paragraph down in relation to OT projects. What is that about?
So that's where we're trying to just look at some of the way we interact with our customers and making it more mobile. So it's things like mobile applications so that we can do our building consents, etc.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Thanks for the report, and the narrative's quite clear about the ups and downs. However, there are repeated references to the reason for some of the unfavourable results being COVID related, either in property or in parking, whatever. And I recall someone, Sue Bidrose actually, I think was asked by someone, I don't know, at a previous meeting whether we could expect at some time just an analysis of the quantum of those effects. Have you got that so far?
So I can make a comment on the external revenue.
I'm wondering if we could, in due course, sooner rather than later, just have a brief analysis that shows the direct effects, such as the results of decisions that council made to forgive parking or forgive rents or whatever else, and perhaps a separate category of other response of whatever kind and what it cost, because I think the community would be very interested and very appreciative to know just how much money its authority has tipped into supporting members of this community over the past period and ongoing, and I think that should be highlighted in the public domain.
I agree, but you would like to speak to some of that now, Gavin, just to give some examples?
So I can just give us some examples. So the revenue, just trying to look at obviously the things that were before COVID and obviously post-COVID. So the revenue looks like it's down about 5.4 million for the year in terms of COVID-related activity. 1.8 of that relates to the fact that we allowed the parking, free parking, and obviously the impact on lease parking for the year. Commercial buildings, or all property rents is around 900,000 for the 3 months. But then obviously you have a shortfall in activity. So for example, aquatic services, and we mentioned it in the report, was down 900,000. Again, that's just the fact that we were closed. So there is a number of reasons why those sorts of things. The visitor centre was didn't have a lot of activity, the art gallery, libraries, etc., Ulverston. So those things were impacted.
Thank you for that. Did you have any other questions?
Yeah, can I just follow on though, please? We can all see that, and by reading the reports we get a rough idea, but I'm just hoping that we might actually, by way of a press release or a particular document, make sure that the community is aware of the quantum of different sorts of impacts that the city has decided to put into community support or business support or whatever it might be. In a more accessible, not that there's anything obscure about our documents, Mr. Chairman, but in a more accessible way than going through and speculating about, you know, what the parking cost or how much it costs us to forgive rents on our commercial properties in George Street and elsewhere and that sort of thing. Behaviour not reflected by a lot of the business community, I must say.
Chief Executive Graham, would you like to make some comments?
Just a short one, if I might, through the chair. If, in line with our newly minted action lists and program, if council would like an action to flow from this, it would be helpful that you resolved something so that it's then able to be tracked and able to be shown as having been completed, so that we have a clear expectation of what it is that you want and the timeframes.
Well, do you want me to move something now or suggest that an action's for the chair at the end of the meeting, Mr. Chair?
I think if we act for a chair resolution in item 7, that'll be fine.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. Well, actually, I better just check. Is that okay, or do we move something now? What would be better?
My preference would be that it linked to the item, because you've got an item on the agenda.
Okay, so you will give us a subsequent thing when the questions are finished.
I'll come up with something.
Okay.
What I'm asking for is quite simple. I'm just suggesting that the committee ask staff to produce a comprehensive analysis of the total direct and indirect costs of the lockdown, the lockdown period, health response. I'm quite open about the time frame, but clearly I think it would be more useful for us and everyone else if it were in various categories. I mean, and some of that falls out of this document, we know what the parking revenue foregone is. I don't know how much we lost directly from forgiving the rent on our commercial properties or other things, but anyway, I think it's pretty clear what I'm asking for.
We'll add that as item C when we move the minutes shortly.
Thank you.
Yep. Sorry, there were some more questions, so I had Councillor Walker next.
Yeah, thank you. I have one question. It may lead to a subsequent question, depending on your answer. So on page 29, on the table there of the Statement of Financial Position, I'm usually fairly sound with my cognition of financial terminology, but could you just give me maybe a 2 or 3 sentence breakdown of what derivative financial instruments are?
Yeah, it's the wrong man.
Richard, where are you? Is he gone?
Hedges.
Very simply, some of our borrowing is fixed versus the floating rate. What the derivative is the difference between the fixed and the floating rate. So what we are required to do is revalue those loans on an annual basis. And so that's the differential. So effectively we still have, and I think we've commented, we've still got $30 million of loans that are running at 7.5, 7.7%. Our current floating rate is around 2.9%. So it's the difference between the two interest rates on those borrowings.
Okay, so in essence, there's something that sort of there's a bunch of variables there. Are they always necessarily a liability?
These ones will be because they are higher. If you notice, the value is coming down. So if you look at the comparative for last year, it's come down. So what will happen is that there's 10 million coming off in the next week. So we'll be down to 20 million. So by the end of next year, there'll only be one loan left. So that value will drop down again until it hits zero. So effectively it comes back to zero once the loans are paid off, or effectively they transfer. Effectively we pay them off, but then we re-borrow them as a floating borrowing.
It's an excellently explained answer, thank you.
It's a terrible...
Councillor Van der Vis.
On page 35, personnel costs, we've got an unfavourable variance of over $2.5 million. Last year, we had a 7% increase in staff costs, and the year before an 8% increase. What percentage increase is it this time round at $2.5 million?
So this is a variance to budget. So what we're saying is that the actual versus budget was higher, and that was primarily big chunk of it was the annual leave. So effectively, as a result of what's happening in our community, staff, and it's not just staff here, it's staff across all businesses, are taking less leave. So for us, for every 3 months, everybody will accrue a week's leave. Okay, so the cost of a week's leave to this organisation is $1.3 million. So obviously, as people are not taking holidays, the leave liability increases. So that's a chunk of that $2.5 million.
Yeah, I understand all that. I was just wondering what the percentage increase, the absolute percentage increase in staff costs is. I realise that this is a budget variance. I was wondering what your absolute variance is. Do we have yet another increase in staff costs over last year?
Yes, we do, because that was budgeted as part of the annual plan for this year.
Okay, and what percentage increase is that?
I'd have to recalculate. I'm sorry, I haven't got my...
No worries. Is it something that you can email later? That'd be great. Thank you.
Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it goes to Councillor Benson-Pope's forthcoming request. I'm always nervous about the distinction between correlation and causation. I mean, we know, for example, how much money has been foregone from parking revenue, but that's based on standard rates of return on parking. So, for example, were we to not have forgiven parking revenue in Alert Level 4 when no one was driving around and parking, we would have lost that money anyway. So I'm just interested in how granular those assessments are, and whether or not it is in fact possible to attribute any of these specifically to actions or decisions of council.
Probably all we can do is say this is how much revenue shortfall there is in that period. What it relates to will be a matter for you guys, the councillors, to consider. But obviously, like you say, I mean, had we not had free parking, we would have still had lost revenue. Yeah, which is effectively what you're saying.
Would I'd also add that the money we forsook on our leased parking, so what we did was our leased parking didn't resume again until the 1st of August, so people had a month or two when they came out of level 3, they got back down to level 2, and people were using those parks in our car parks around the city, and they were not charged, which was a very reasonable gesture, which is a very real factor in people's pockets. And I think that was the comment perhaps that Mr Benson Pope was alluding to, that there are people that have had benefits. So people that have lease parks, if they don't pay their bill, normally they could lose those parks, but we chose to actually give them the discount that matched the free parking period as well, which, well, not, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just thinking about the effects of COVID on this annual financial result, and wondered about going forward into the next quarter, and whether you felt that your projections, whether you felt comfortable with those, given that we passed the budget in June, whether we were next quarter not going to get a big surprise. Are you feeling fairly comfortable that those projections are what you might have expected, given we've just went into another kind of lockdown?
So we're 2 months in now, but we haven't done a financial report for August yet. We'll do that in the next week. All I probably would say is the impact on our revenue during COVID was less than what we thought. So while there were things that we've talked about that were below budget, obviously what was interesting is things like building services and that were actually, their activity was actually normal, or actually a little bit higher, because they were working remotely and I'll say doing the paperwork. Actually, a lot of stuff got caught up, a lot of that sort of backlog paperwork stuff, so actually that becomes chargeable. So there were some things that actually were favourable over that period, which is interesting. In terms of what's happening since then, I mean, I can only look at the money coming in, and we're not seeing a huge shortfall in money in cash. So the cash position still looks fine, which would indicate that things are okay. But obviously, depending on what happens to the alert levels over the next 6 months, will determine where we end up.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We touched briefly on leave liability, and considering, I guess, that leave liability is sort of hanging like a sword of Damocles over the balance sheets of a plethora of businesses in New Zealand, what are the options as we move forward, legal, of course, available to us?
So what we're going to do as an executive is develop a leave management policy or framework that allows us to manage the leave over the next 12 months to get into a better state. It's quite common. I mean, I've seen the university have got a similar problem, and of course their numbers are a lot bigger than ours. So yeah, it's going to be a problem for all businesses, and it's just a matter of working with your staff and obviously with the unions, etc., to make sure we put in place something that can work.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I'm aware my wife at the university is being forced to take a holiday for the whole of January.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. This might be a bit of a silly question, but on page 31, Enterprise Dunedin looks like its figures are quite low, but is that just me? What is that? It's got 8, and then gap, and then 8, and then 6. Maybe that's normal, I don't know, I'm just...
It's a very small CapEx number. They didn't spend much.
Really?
That's just the capital. So basically that will
Right.
be some, I assume John's here, but it's a purchase of some video equipment.
So does that mean they had quite a big underspend? Or they just didn't get given any money?
Effectively, there's no budget.
Oh, so they had no budget at all?
Yeah.
Is there any reason why they had no budget?
Because they don't generally do building and that sort of thing. Capital expenditure is what that relates to. So they had operating expenditure. They performed their duties as per normal, but they didn't have a large capital expenditure.
Right, okay, thank you. Can I ask another question around budgets? We've had previous workshops and things where we've asked for questions around, say, for example, property, but all different areas, where is it correct that if there's a profit from a certain area, it goes into a pool for everything? Is that what happens?
So our bottom line result for council is a combination of pluses and minuses across the organisation.
Right. So it is because sometimes it's hard to see from a governance point of view which areas are really strong and which areas are weak financially when they're put into, when the budgets aren't broken down to their, particular area. Is that provided anywhere?
Yeah, if you go to page 32,
Yep.
that shows the breakdown by group.
But so can I just clarify, if there's a profit in an area, that just gets put into the pool rather than back into that budget for that department, is that correct?
So if you look at the budget for the year, for the full year, it's $9.8 million. So that includes obviously the Waipori Fund making money, which again is just, Waipori Fund's used to provide a subsidy against the rates. So one of the policies the council has is called a revenue and financing policy, and that determines how things are funded and what things make money and what don't. So obviously, a number of those activities have a break-even budget, which effectively means that they are fully funded. And then obviously things like transport has a positive contribution because they have money that comes from NZTA to fund their capital budget. We've talked about waste environmental, which has a surplus. Although for the year they actually ended up with quite a lot different. But at the end of the day, all the activities contribute to the bottom line of council.
Any other questions? Councillor Benson Pipe, would you like to see your surprise motion?
Thank you, Dr. Collard. That's fine. I think including instead of just a report detailing, but how about that? Or whatever people are happy with. Which includes.
I'd be happy to second such a report and such a motion.
Provide a report detailing a comprehensive analysis, something like that.
Hey.
Perhaps a comprehensive analysis. Well, we've got to get the grammar right. We've been reading a lot about it in the ODT.
My grammar's dead. Yeah.
And there are no collective nouns in there, I'm pleased to say.
Has that been seconded? Has it been seconded?
No.
Yes, you can ask a question briefly.
Yes, Mr. Logie, sorry, at page 31, the CapEx budget. I was just looking at the percentages of actual versus budget for the full year, and in many cases it's quite dramatically different. Obviously down in infrastructure it's about the same, but a lot of them are 50%, arts and culture, corporate services, property, parks and rec, around about half of the CapEx budget was spent. But customer and regulatory services about 15%, community and planning only 25%. And given that the COVID only affected us in that last quarter of the year, what does that indicate? Does it indicate that people leave their CapEx budgets till the last quarter, or how? I would have thought that they would all be, say, 75%.
So we've been flagging a shortfall along the CapEx budget probably since October. So maybe if we refer back to the graphs on page 27. So if you look at the red line versus the green, so the green line is our budget. So this is on the bottom left-hand graph, year-to-date capital expenditure. So you can see that we'd sort of started to drop off in that October period, and effectively it's continued through. So yes, some of it was already flagged as a shortfall. But if you look at things like transport, while it's underspent, I mean, you've got the Mosgiel pool, for example. I mean, transport renewals were reasonably close to budget. Three Waters was reasonably close to budget.
Yeah.
So some of it's just those, and we refer to it in the commentary around things like we've just put projects on hold while we get things right. So things like the Mosgiel pool, obviously that's been well documented as to where we're at with that process. But obviously part of that was budgeted in the current year. Some of the IT projects are just taking a little bit longer to scope. So again, we've been flagging that reasonably early on. Some of the property stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so just all big project deferrals.
Some of it's just big projects, but like I say, we started seeing that in October, that it was coming off, and COVID's just probably just made it slightly worse.
Do you think perhaps people got nervous about things at Christmas time because it's another 6 months?
Yeah, although, like I say, what's interesting is that the CapEx spend compared to the previous year is actually not too bad, given that we lost a month and a bit. So it's a lot better than what we were. We were previously delivering around the sort of the $40 to $50 million mark. So certainly we've upped our game. So,
Thank you.
It has historically been a time too through the autumn where often a lot more actual money is spent too. And because of the lockdown, that did severely affect the ability to go and do any work, which just often work that gets put into the budget, gets started planning at the start of the year, and then it ramps up to the big spend at the end of the year. So that's a negative too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope, would you like to speak to your motion?
I don't think that's necessary. I made
Yeah,
clear, I
it.
think, the reason for the request earlier. I think it's self-explanatory. I hope it is.
Okay, certainly is to me. I'd already seconded it, or I'd indicated I would second it. It's just, yeah. Any other speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Anyone against? It's passed. Item 7, items for consideration by the Chair. Does anyone have any issues that they want to raise at this point? If that's the case, I'll declare the meeting closed at 1:34. Thank you. We'll have a change of chairs.
Welcome, councillors. We'll get the Economic Development Standing Committee underway. There are no apologies. I'll move that we confirm the agenda, seconded by Rachel. All in favour? Against? Carried. Declarations of interest. I assume there have been no changes in interest since our previous meeting, so in that case I will move that the committee notes the elected members' interest register and confirms the proposed management plan for members' interests. Seconded, Councillor Wiley. All in favour? Against? Carried. Terms of reference for the Grow Dunedin Partnership, and councillors, we have with us today David Thompson and John Gallagher, both members of the Grow Dunedin Partnership, to answer your questions should you have them. And of course, John's here as well. So, questions, councillors? Councillor Barker.
I have two questions, and I guess one of them is probably for council staff themselves. GDP are charged in the terms of references with delivering various actions, reports and presentations, and I was just wondering what the support mechanism and budget is to allow the GDP to actually perform those actions.
Yes, so the uncommitted funding sits at around $200,000 now, Councillor. So some of the projects previously that have been committed to include Study Dunedin, Project China, and some of the work we undertake with economic analysis. So we have approximately $200,000 currently to be allocated through GDP for projects that they may wish to have undertaken.
Thank you. The other question was on page 23 around the membership, and it says each member may appoint their own representative, and unless there are exceptional reasons and prior approval of the chair, an appointed representative may not be substituted. And I noticed that the DCC has the ability to substitute their representative with the deputy chairs of the Economic Development Committee, so I wondered why the other members couldn't choose substitutes.
I'll have a crack at it, if you like. That's pretty pragmatic. It's based on the experience of how the partnership ran in its early years, and we did have one or two situations where we had a nominal member from an organisation that, quite frankly, was not attending very many of the meetings and was sent a different person every time, so there was a level of disengagement with some of the partners. So that's why we really felt the onus should be, if you're representing your organisation on the GDP, the expectation is you should be attending the GDP, not nominating it to someone else on a regular basis. I think the situation with the city is quite different because there's obviously a greater level of understanding around the table through groups like this of what actually is going on. So I think we did feel at times we were getting someone new up to speed on the last 2 years of what we'd done as a substitute person.
Yep, and I think going forward we really want to try and get a cohesive combination of people working, in around this new terms of reference. So David's point's exactly right.
We've also read about tourism wanting to have better representation on the partnership, and I wonder if there's a mechanism to address that.
You can see in there that we're going to advertise for independent members. And so in that process, we'll be looking to bring skill sets that represent the city's economy, as well as, primarily we want governance skill sets, but we're also looking for secondary skill sets that cover those sectors that form our economy. And to a degree, these days maybe as well, things that relate to our community, because we have this linking between the health of your community and the health of your economy that are pretty closely linked. So we'll be looking for a spread across both sectors.
And I think in part that was why there's quite a number allocated to that. I mean, there's 5 maximum there that we could encourage to come on, and that does give us an ability to get quite a broad diversity, which to Chris's point is very important. So that's the next task that lies before us.
So part of the process of the Martin Jenkins review was around the timing, and this sort of started off in 2018 and then came to council in January 2019, and another report around this time last year about the terms of reference and how they were going to be forward. Is there a reason why it took a year to come this far?
I think, again, just to David's point, as a courtesy to all of the participating members, It needs to go back to each of those organisations, which then needs to go back to each of their councils or boards, and it's a slow process of out for consultation and back with feedback and then out again. So we would have preferred it a little tighter, but that's just as a courtesy to all of the participating members. It did take quite a while.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, two other considerations I think we had in mind. Firstly, was the local body elections and bringing something forward to a new council, and then of course COVID-19 came and probably took a good 4 months, tagging a good 4 months or 5 months onto the timeline. Actually quite fortuitous, because it gave us a bit more time to think about the role GDP might play in terms of building resilience in terms of times when you're not growing your actual economic recovery issues.
I guess my final question is around, I think it's page 37, 38, which is around the implementation of the economic development strategy, and the economic development strategy implementation steering group was supposed to set up, I guess it says here, an implementation plan with more detailed timelines, measures, resourcing, and that an implementation plan would be released publicly. I'm not sure that I've seen one. Has that been something that's come into public? I looked on the website, etc., and couldn't see anything there.
Are you referring to the original economics?
The original plan.
Yeah, there was no implementation plan ever made public. I guess we just cracked on with the work program, as various of the entities did. We do have an Enterprise Dunedin work program that will be coming to council, which should address some of those questions. And GDP ultimately will be producing its implementation plan as part of the review of the economic development strategy and prioritisation of their work program.
It's before us to do this work now, to come back to that plan and start to integrate that into the processes that we're putting in place.
Yeah, would I also look at it? It says formally review the strategy in 5 years, which would have been 2018. So there's just that, I guess, that concern around how well the strategy is tracking, the reporting to council and to the public on how it's doing,
sure.
And the way forward.
No, it's a fair point, and it's one that one will be one of the top priorities that we'll be focusing on over the next 12 months.
Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. So could one of you two be the chair? Like, is that, or we have to appoint someone new, do we, that would be the chair? Or like, how would that work? Could it be from someone who's already, well, I sort of was thinking that myself, but I didn't like to say that, but
Well, as it stands at the moment, the terms of reference are stated that one of the independent appointees would become chair.
Right.
And so that was the process that was agreed on by everybody. That was the recommendations back. So we'll work with that over the course of the next very short period, because we'll need to get the processes in place.
The issue I can see with that is that an independent person won't have the background knowledge that the ones who are already sitting on there have. How do you deal with that?
I mean, one would imagine you would progress through the chair based on some experience on the committee previously.
Right. So now, once that's in, and of course once we approve this, is that sort of set in stone, or could that be adjusted? Like, say for example, one of the independents that you appoint, is there a possibility they could be acting chair while they get up to speed? You know, I'm just thinking from a governance point of view, you'd have someone coming in being chair and they've never served on that board.
Oh, it's a fair point. And I guess practically we would not want to put someone in that position.
Yes.
It's unfair to expect someone to be able to, activate and deal with, what's going to be quite an interesting agenda straight away.
Yeah.
So I think, our back to my comment earlier, I mean, our preference will be to think carefully about the type of people that will come in. This is setting it up to start in 2 years' time, when the first appointment is reviewed. It may well be at that point that there's logic in making a shift for those very reasons.
Right.
I don't think it's appropriate at the moment.
Right, but this could be a bit flexible, could it? So we don't have to stick, like if you realise that you've got someone who's really good, but they don't have that background, is there any flexibility, for the chair to come from the existing people?
We have one independent member. So there is one person who is currently on GDP who could be the chair.
Okay.
And that will be a discussion for the partners. And from that discussion, there may well be the appointment of an interim chair to tide us through perhaps another 12 or 18 months until the new members are up to speed.
Thank you. Yes, that's good. One more question. So, so does GDP see itself as a group that sort of, I suppose, calls the economic development to account, you know, and says, oh, hey, how, you know, are you meeting these targets? What does success look like? And measuring that sort of thing. Is that what you see for this, for GDP? I'm just trying to clarify how you see that.
As part of that, not exclusively.
No,
but I think we would certainly have an opportunity to, you know, bring together all of the participant members that are currently there representing the organisations, and then bringing in 4 or 5 members from externally. That's a perfect environment to have a good debate around that and get the right sort of feedback. So yes, I think we would see that as part of us leading that conversation, and that would obviously have to move into a lot of other parts of the community as well. But somebody at some point has to start the process and set the agenda and start to get some genuine feedback, because I think, you know, that particular strategy was always acknowledged as a very innovative and a very far thinking, or, you know, far reaching strategy, and we want to do some work to make sure that it's still relevant, because in a couple of years' time that conversation probably needs to reinstigate anyway, you know, from the point of view of where does the city go from here. So I think that's all part and parcel of the agenda that we'll be starting to build.
Councillor Barker hinted at it herself, I think, earlier, that we've got the strategies are going to be renewed soon anyway. Do you see GDP playing quite a big role in that for the economic development strategy?
You would like to think so, because I think what we hope we can do is to provide you know, a conduit for a lot of the voices out there in our community who might not otherwise want to, you know, end up wanting to be engaged in this. So we'd hope to be able to bring a representative set of responses back, so that the strategy actually does, you know, does resonate with as many people across the business and the community side of things as we possibly can. That's the way you get a good strategy in place. Yeah.
Councillor Hawkins.
None taken. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora koroa. Thank you for joining us today. I have a question, and don't panic. I'm not suggesting that we're trying to mend the terms of reference at this point and go around the houses again. But my question is also around the membership of the independent membership, where it says that the GDP may appoint up to 5 additional members from the Dunedin business sector explicitly. And I can see potentially a value in people from the training provision sector, or people from a government department or agency, or people with a governance background specifically that could add value to this work. And I'm just seeking assurances that this won't be interpreted quite as literally as that in terms of making those appointments.
Oh, it's a good point. Again, I don't think the intention is to make it exclusively from a business perspective. You know, I think as we move through this process, we recognise that we do have to spread through the community and try and get as broad a representation as we can. So yes, without going any further right now, but that will certainly be our expectation. It won't be necessarily people who have businesses here, for example. We would want people with some governance experience if that was possible, and that just helps the process. But I think you know, we haven't really had a full debate yet about how that 5 people may well be comprised. But we'll take exactly that point on board.
I think we certainly discussed this at the time we were doing the terms of reference review. The other thing we're quite mindful of the need to do, and I think the term business here could be used quite broadly, is economic development and the GDP is one strand of activity of this city. And so we've got to be really careful that we don't open ourselves up to end up straying into other strands. Right? So that's one of the reasons we've probably gone for that narrow definition, even if we might apply it quite broadly. But we shouldn't be trying to develop strategies for things other than economic development. We should be working with those other strategies, but the danger of going really broad on your independent membership is you start straying into things we should be interacting with, not driving. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. It's a question around the expected term, and I was just wanting some clarification from someone as to what was the term in the past term of reference. Did that have a finite time? No. So
I don't think it was. I don't think it was, actually, when I go back and have a look at the original one.
So I'm assuming that the idea is for continuity here?
Yep.
Excellent. And my other question was really to Councillor Barker's point, because I did wonder about that in terms of the recommendations, and this is probably for you, Councillor Staines. I'm assuming what's meant by the second recommendation, where alternates are suggested, Councillor Elder and Wiley, that's with the agreement of the Chair as per the others, that other comment. I'm assuming that's the case, is it?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Councillor Elder, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, you've read the Martin Jenkins report, you've seen what they had to say and their recommendations, and I just wanted to know what you view this process as being and what the strengths are in this process that we're doing now. Yes, and
in terms of the discussion of the terms
yes.
of reference?
Yes.
Well, I think it's the first part of validating the conversation between the council and this adjunct, this organisation that's out there doing some work in the economic strategy area. You know, so for us, it's really important that we get a clear understanding and a clear relationship working through with the council, and that we're able to engage with the community in a way that gets the message out and back, and that we can provide the advice back to council in terms of how a strategy needs to evolve. I mean, for us, strategy is a continuous process. It always is in any organisation, be it commercial or non-profit. And so you need to be looking at that regularly, to Councillor Barker's point. So that process now is what we think is probably the most important first step, so that we start to think about what the future might look like. And I think, again, the comment was made here earlier that one of the things is to try to understand what success looks like for the city in 5 years' time, and then bring that together as a cohesive update on the strategy. So we have to think about those things in that way, and we see us as being I hesitate to use the word middleman, but we're the opportunity in the middle to create some conversations both ways, and bring the experience of the people around the table to bear on some of that advice back. That's what we're trying to set in place now.
Councillor Lord.
No, I had another question on top of that. Coming up is the 10-year plan, but also it's post-COVID-19. Well, it's COVID-19. We would like to think it was post-COVID-19, but it's not. And that's impacting the economy. Where do you see yourselves fitting in that 10-year plan and the strategy document, and also dealing with COVID-19 and its impacts?
You do
So
that.
just in respect of COVID, I mean, one of the points I think around COVID-19 is that probably the next 18 months are much more about tactics and grand strategy. So for the next 18 months, I'm sure that the partnership will be focused on tactical responses to a COVID-19 situation that's still quite unclear. And once it settles in some way, shape or form, which it will do, perhaps late next year, we'll then be able to use that as a springboard for the strategy. So I wouldn't expect a grand strategic vision to come out of the next 6 to 12 months, because our world's not a stable enough place. I'll leave John to comment on the other.
Well, I think what we were able to do during the lockdown period, we did quite a lot of workshopping around what a COVID response might look like for the city. So to David's point, we've done a lot of the preliminary work already, thinking about how that might work. And in part of that, as we've mentioned in the past, is about not necessarily trying to restore what we might have had, is as much as saying, so at this point now, what might the changes be in the city that makes sense in this new environment? And that's a slightly more testing conversation, because you are looking at that. We have the brainstorm coming up. That's just one part of that process, is to try to encourage it. And the comments I've had back subsequent to the fact that the community now sees that is there's a lot of people who see it as a very good way, and quite a lateral way, to get out there and test our thinking. So that's where we're trying to get to now. So we've got all this in place, and we'd like to get this agreed off, and then we can get on to get the work done in those areas.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, my question. Thank you, Chair. My question was partly asked by the Mayor, and it was about the appointment of. Well, my question is really the appointment of those 5 people. Is that something that you'll do? You'll advertise, or will you actually cherry pick the types of people you want, or?
No. The intention is that it's actually put out to the public, and we'll take applications as a first starting point. and see what comes from that. I mean,
And
arguably we might encourage some people to apply, but we haven't spoken about that yet.
And would you envisage that they would then become just permanent members, or would they be for a period of time, and that you might replace them on a 18-month interval so that you could have different people, different perspectives at all the different times?
Yeah, I think we'd want to do that on a rotational basis rather than having 3 or 4 people come on then leave. Yeah, we'd like to try to get some process in place that allow that to be set up in a way that you might replace one every 2 years, for example. But we haven't spoken about that, so that's just one option that just top of mind.
No, absolutely fine, thank you.
I think realistically it would probably take 2 or 3 years, up to 5, to get the 5 on board. You wouldn't probably put 5 in straight away, especially given we've got new representatives probably from Otago Polytechnic coming on as well.
So the intellectual experience around the table has been diminished a little bit in the last wee while, so we need to rebuild our capability. That's not to say people have lost the plot, it's just that we've had a lot of changes. And so we want to make sure that we get a good balance too, and I guess that's a conversation for the group to have, is to sort of try and get the right people, coming on board.
I think also this sort of conversation and testing of our thinking is really important for us in terms of attracting quality people on as independents, because quality people will not come on to GDP as independents and stay with us unless they feel their time is of value and is being valued and is making a difference. And that was certainly our experience last time around. I mean, John, with great forbearance, has hung in there, but you do need to feel you're making a difference.
Well, I think it's about recognising the importance of this as part of the overall process about setting Dunedin up for the next 10 years and beyond. And once people understand that there is an opportunity to engage in that conversation, it does become, people become a little more engaged. And we want that to be the case because that's the really important asset that we can create through this particular group, for the next 3, 5, 10 years. Because I think, without doubt, getting the economic strategy right for the city over the next while is a very key and very fundamental piece of work that I think everybody recognises. And there is a lot of people out in the community who do understand that, but they don't always find the right way to engage. And we're hopeful that this will give another forum for people to actually put some input in if we can encourage that, which is one of our hopes.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I guess just following on from some other questions there, I just wanted to clarify that the GDP would be appointing the 5 new members, whether that would come back to council or not.
No, we'll manage that internally according to the terms of reference that we put out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, you've covered off quite a lot of elements of my question. But anyway, I wondered if you could just summarise what you consider to be the key benefits of this revision of the terms of reference.
The first one definitely is committed independent membership of GDP. That's really huge, and that's what we've struggled with over the last 3 years.
Great.
And I think to add to that, Jules, I'd say clarity of purpose too. I think we, in as much as we might want to create an environment where we can get a conversation going around strategy, as a group, we have to have a decent, clear strategy ourselves as to how we'll go about doing that. Yes. And I think the terms of reference, this conversation, the discussions we've had are all part of us getting that together. And we can then say we know what the game plan is for the moment, and then we can get on with it. So we've sort of been a little bit in hiatus for the moment, yes, but we've done as much as we can, as I indicated earlier, with the work through lockdown, and thinking about what COVID might mean for the city and so on. So a lot of that base work is done. Now we want to wrap the strategy around it and get it going.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. 3 questions. The Martin Jenkins report, do you feel that Council has, or GDP, both of us, that the things that needed to be met with that review have now been met once we sign this off?
Yes, in the short answer. I mean, the members of this particular group spent some time with the Martin Jenkins representative. The conversations were very open and very direct, which is what we wanted. So I think the work to bring us to this point has been done and been done well. So no, we're happy with that.
Good. The 5 positions, will they only come from Dunedin, or will you look further afield?
So Dunedin business, interpreted broadly, could certainly be someone from outside of Dunedin residentially who has significant business interests in the city or significant other interests in the city.
Because I mean, skills-wise, we might be able to get better skills. That's all I'm thinking for some. Yeah.
Yeah, we really debated this back and forward, and Martin Jenkins tested our thinking a little bit, and we were trying to balance knowing your own economy, knowing your own city.
Yes.
There is a capacity to, if we do need significant independent external expertise, there is a capacity for us to bring people in to support the group in those sorts of projects. So I think that's probably the way to do that. I think this is about people in our city owning the economic future of our city.
Yes.
That's why we focus on Dunedin people.
Exactly, and I think the other thing is that David also noted, we would reserve the right in our own minds mostly to say, well, look, if there was someone out there that had experience in some other part of this country or somewhere else in the world in terms of a program similar to this, for example, we might ask them to come in and do some work with us.
Yes.
But we wouldn't necessarily make that a permanent appointment. We would probably bring someone in to guide us through that conversation and just test our thinking. Those conversations are quite useful on occasions. But I think we want to make sure that the focus is all about what the city needs to look like and how we go about doing what we do. And quite honestly, a lot of the ideas to make the city something perhaps a little different than it is now reside in the city anyway. So we just have to create the encouragement for people to come out and put those forward.
My final question is around timing, because we're working through the 10-year plan now. That's my only concern, is that because you're such a big part of our vision and strategy for our city, with being, and if we sign off the 10-year plan before you've had a chance to have a go at that's my only concern, is that time-wise, how are you going to work around that? Because it'd be really good for GDP to have a say in the 10-year plan.
Not something we've actually sat down and considered, but I would certainly take the view that if there was a timeline that we had to meet, then everything would be done or humanly possible to meet that and to provide that input. And I'm not familiar with the timeframes over which we'd have to operate. But again, the point is a valid one, but we haven't had any discussion around how that might have to fit together. I mean, I'd defer that to Chris and John as to what the timeline might need to be.
I think part of this will depend on what we see come from the great brainstorm. Clearly, as John has pointed out, our focus will be on COVID recovery. Things are too fluid at the moment to be really trying to tackle long-term strategy. We need to get the short-term ones that get the city's economy up and running. So if we get some really good ideas from that brainstorm, then there is budget that we have for this financial year. But knowing projects that work on economies, they are generally more than 1 year. So that will give us a lead of whether there has to be funding for projects that go beyond that. If there is, it'll be a discussion with John to see whether he has that in his budget now or not. If there isn't any money in the proposed budget, then GDP as a organisation could put a submission to council seeking additional funding for a specific project.
Yeah, I just don't want GDP to miss the boat, for the next 10 years. Because what's our sale date then? For the 10-year plan.
Draft budgets probably the week of the 16th of December, but then January meeting, end of January, public consultation during March, April, and then hearings in May.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Fiso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tēnā korua, thank you both. Can you just make a comment, please, on the diversity of gender and ethnicity in your representatives sent along by the partners?
Just acknowledging the importance of it would be my first comment. We haven't specifically sat down and determined. We'll see what comes back from the advertising of the candidates, but clearly we would want to try to include as much of that representation across the board as we can. But I think equally, these roles are to some extent voluntary, and we want to make sure that we prevail on, put people in difficult positions either. So it's not an easy answer right now, but certainly we have no problem in running that as one of the criteria that we'll need to consider.
Currently, 3 of the partner representatives are female. One is Naitahu.
And my second question, and I'm not sure if it's to the gentleman here or it's about the objectives, particularly the one that talks about identify the need for strategic investment in the Dunedin economy that will support and enhance future growth. So Mr. Christie knows very well that I'm always going on about the other well-beings. So how does growth, how do you interpret growth, or does the GDP have discussions philosophically in terms of, if we keep on going for economic growth, we're going to just fall off the cliff anyway? But
So absolutely. So the economic development strategy is very much focused on sustainable development for the city, and that was the GDP's foundational document. That was our first bit of work. And quite a few of the practical projects we've actually funded are around sustainable business. We work really closely with people, but that's again a case where we've got to work with, but not take over the work of other groups that might be working in that space.
It's quite interesting through that COVID recovery, and in fact before COVID recovery, when we were looking at what are the things that inhibit our economic development, things like social housing. Housing and social housing come into that, and were on our list, and doing the work around COVID recovery, it was pretty clear there are as many, if not more, projects that need, or issues that need to be dealt with that relate to what would be termed community development than economic development. So, I think we've come to realise that both are interlinked. If you've got a healthy economy, you can usually have a healthy community. If you don't have a healthy community, then often that impacts on your economy. So that they go together. I think that's realised. Councillor Wiley, you indicated you wish to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Elder. Discussion, do you want your...
Thank you, Chair. I just want to remind all councillors, as you went through the questions, to look at the terms of reference and the purpose. I think that purpose has really been defined in the Grow Dunedin Partnership back in August 2020, earlier this month. And it's the key thing, just to follow up on Councillor Lefiso's question, the partners have a shared interest and are committed to supporting the long-term sustainable and inclusive growth of the Dunedin economy. And I think when we look at how we move forward with this paper, we look at the recommendations, it is about actually making sure we do have a Grow Dunedin partnership that reflects where we want to go to as a city, where we want to work with, where they want to work with council, and really develop and see us as a strong city moving forward. And first off, I want to thank John and David for being here. The skills and what they bring to the table are very much the leadership qualities that we're looking for as we go out to the community. And again, they voluntarily give up their time, and I think that's the important part. We consistently hear of a lot of individuals who give up their time to be involved with council and with entities like this. The one thing that sort of goes quietly behind the radar is the work that Councillor Staines has done in chairing this for the last number of years, and they have made some really good progress at places. And under his chairmanship, and I think it's really been quite positive, so thank you for that. What we are looking for here, though, is we're looking to promote some synergies and collaboration across the city, and as we go through the recommendation and through the paper, and I think the biggest part that really changed the dynamics of the Grow Dunedin partnership is actually looking towards those 5 individuals to bring on, and because again it's going to be about the talents, and when we look around Dunedin, we do have many talented individuals, And that really is bringing everybody who wants to be a part of this and they want to make a contribution to the city. We're all here because we wanted to make a contribution to the city. There's a lot of others around the community that want to make a contribution to the city. They don't want to stand for office. They don't want to go through an election and everything else. But they have some really good skills to contribute with. And whether it's across the public, private sector, it doesn't matter. But I think this is a great way to find up to 5 very talented individuals to help lead us going forward. But thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, and I would like to reiterate our thanks to you, Councillor Staines, for your leadership over the past period for the GDP and the achievements that have resulted. I want to acknowledge the work of the 2 gentlemen before us, Mr Thompson and Mr Gallagher. And what I wanted to say to you is that that lateral thinking is going to be so important in this very strange time we live in. And I wanted to urge you to be bold and to be brave and to thank you for your contribution going forward to the city.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to also give my thanks to David and John, particularly, well, when they're professional directors as well, you know, doing this. I didn't realise it was a non-paid role. So I'd like to say I think it should be a paid role when they're doing, you know, holding the economic development, whole group to account and doing really full-on work around the vision. I think it deserves to be a paid role myself. So that's my feeling with that. And to attract good independent members to that board as well, I think you need to consider remuneration. I mean, certainly board fees anyway should be definitely considered. So yeah, I think this is a good move to start looking at these things that have been long, by the sound of it, overdue with the Martin Jenkins review. I think it's a good idea. And I think it's great that also new members, Councillor Wiley and Councillor Elder, are going to be involved in this process. I think they have a lot of good ideas too, and so I'm excited for our city and look forward to things happening.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, I'd like to congratulate you guys on this new revised terms of reference, and I think it certainly gives me renewed confidence in the ability of GDP to get more things done, and I think it will do the same for the business community. And I think having this committed independent membership that you referred to will indeed give the clarity of purpose required to take it forward. So I look forward to that enhanced capability for getting things done. That's great. Well done.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank John and David for putting their hands up and for all your contributions so far. Chris for chairing and all the work he's done as well. I think this is the right time to actually create a dynamic group. We've got lots of challenges right now and we need to be nimble on our feet. We need a group that can see the big picture and think laterally, and so that those 5 extra members, I believe, will actually have the ability to contribute to that. I think in particular there's tourism and hospitality and retail that are hurting right now, and also we've got the hospital rebuild coming up. So there's a lot going on, and so I believe having that flexibility of makeup will be really important. I also am really glad University of Otago and Polytech are there for some of the retraining people are going to have to do and the hospital rebuild. So I think this is really good. It's good timing for the 10-year plan and COVID-19 recovery, and certainly you've got some challenges, but I'm sure that having new people and fresh blood and if anything like the Dunedin brainstorm and other ideas coming through, really, really important. So thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John, David and Chris, for being here and your hard work on the Grow Dunedin partnership. I was there at the genesis of the strategy, and you'll be pleased to see my well-done highlighted copy of, so I've kept quite a close eye on it and was part of the promotion of the strategy early on when I worked in council. So I've been watching very interestedly, and certainly with the Martin Jenkins review, certainly been interested to see us come to, I guess, an end point in that process, which is very pleasing to see. I noted what you said, David, about Dunedin people owning the economic development strategy. I thought it was a really important part, and where the strategy actually kind of started off with as a partnership strategy. So I really welcome those extra 5 people and everyone's ability to compete to be one of the top 5 to get on the partnership. And I certainly support the terms of reference, and I thank everyone for their good work so far.
I think perhaps in speaking to this, it's been a long journey. Grow Dunedin partnership was a very strong partnership in writing the strategy, which was a very innovative strategy, and the way it was done was innovative. And a lot of achievement has gone under our belt over the last 6 years or more. And we've made some, what I would like to think, some really significant strides in helping sections of our economy grow. On the other hand, I think the terms of reference and the fact that we had a budget but we didn't have a budget. I mentioned earlier the fact that economic development is a long game, and so when we started we had, correct me if I'm wrong, something like about $580,000 of budget to assign to projects, and we did some significant work to decide what to invest that money in the first year. In the second year, we had a little bit of it left, but most of it was assigned to long-running projects such as education, the education sector, the China relationship. So there wasn't much money to allocate, and most of our time was spent trying to decide whether to approve $10,000 expenditure on something or not. And so it was well overdue for review. And when Martin Jenkins came down to do the review, I know that he got, as has been mentioned, a very full and frank view from the partners on what was broken and what was needing to be fixed. And it was really pleasing to see that their recommendations were pretty much aligned with our thinking. The only disappointing thing is it has taken an incredibly long time to actually get the new terms of reference in place and move on. So today really is a watershed day. It gives Grow Dunedin Partnership the opportunity to restart, to seek new members at a time when probably there are some of the biggest questions around how to go forwards that we've had in many, many years. So I certainly am confident that the partnership will appear in a much stronger form with new blood, and it will be good for the city. Councillor Wiley, your right of reply. Councillors, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for taking of your time to come in. So, on to... I'll just get the economic development team in. Are you... Chanel's going to step in. Are you coming up the front, Malcolm? I think you're being signalled. So, councillors, questions of the activity report? Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I've got several questions. The first one is about, to Mr Christie probably, and maybe Mr Anderson. I've picked up in the last few days, and this is coming out of some things that I mentioned in the report, this starting to be this talk about people from Auckland, and we're looking at welcoming visitors to our city. I wonder how we're going to ensure that manaakitanga to our visitors from Auckland to make sure that they are welcomed and there isn't that resistance and hesitation, which is what I've sensed in the community. It's really more out of just fear than anything else.
Thank you, Councillor. That's a good question. Manaakitanga is obviously a key component of the tourism industry, and as far as we're aware, that is still the feeling amongst operators and hopefully the wider community. But to be fair, we don't have a lot of intelligence at the moment.
I imagine that's something that they'll be keeping an eye on.
Yes, definitely.
Second question was around the trade, marketing and tourism comments on page 32, and particularly item 55, which talks about perception across all markets that our country will be the first that they're able to sell to their clients internationally. Are you able to speak to that in a little bit more detail?
I guess when this report was written, that was very much the case, where there was no COVID in the community in New Zealand. So at that stage we were very confident. When I say we, I'm talking about Tourism New Zealand, our other partners that work in the international trade space, that New Zealand would be a very favourable destination. I think that is probably still the case, and if we look around, if you look at Qantas, for example, some of their predictions, they're looking at really getting back into the international market in 2021, so we're still reasonably confident the international market will come back and come back very strongly. New Zealand will still be a favoured destination. And
Mr Christie, I think this one's for you. It's around film and it's on page 28. And I notice there's still a hive of activity around film. 22.3 about the 6 domestic feature films and 4 domestic television and web series. What's the difference in the impact, economic impact to the city from domestic films and TV series versus the international ones, would you say, in general terms?
Oh, in general terms, international would bring bigger budgets than the domestic, but the domestic do have higher volume levels, so total impact, I would think we're probably pretty much par for course in terms of both having about equal contribution. The difficulty obviously at the moment is in international film crews actually getting into the country, getting the appropriate visas to be able to be here to film, and in some cases funding internationally has also become a little bit problematic, but we'd expect to see that continue to grow, and as people are able to get their visas, we should see that international film sector coming back quite strongly as well.
Thank you. And final question for Ms O'Brien, which is around jobs done. What job done? What's your feeling around the number of internships or participating businesses you'll get this time?
Thank you for the question. Well, as you know, the appetite for interns, is marginal, perhaps, but I can report that we have currently 12 businesses participating in the program, with 23 intern funds allocated. We have cancelled the event on the 23rd of September, but the program remains open and in fact provides a little bit more flexibility and a bit more time for businesses to make decisions. So the program will now be open until about the 2nd of April. And that means that businesses can still participate, but we'll be doing it in collaboration with the University and the Polytech, so that there won't be an event itself, but we'll still be able to facilitate interaction with students.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, the overall economic strategy of 2013 sets out the 2 economic goals. Do we have a progress report on those 2 goals? How we get?
We do. It was the Infometrics report. I'm just trying to think. Benji is here, which dates back to the 31st of March. Has previously been circulated. I'm happy to recirculate that to councillors. It has been reported to this committee. We were tracking pretty well pre-COVID. In fact, almost in line with our targets of GDP growth and job growth. Obviously, that will now need to be modified, and we'll get updated reports quarterly as to that progress in terms of those two measures, bearing in mind there are other measures that we see as important as well around some of the social aspects of the development of our strategy, and we'll report those back in due course, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you for the report. A couple of questions. First one was about around the Footprint app. I read that and got really excited, so I went and looked at it. But if you go onto the app, there's just a litany of bad reviews. Just seems sort of a wee bit rubbish. Seriously, I mean, yeah.
Sorry.
So is that being rectified?
Which app was that?
It's item 17, the Footprint app.
I can pass that on, Councillor, to...
Am I the only one interested in recycling food?
We'll note that, thank you.
It's just worth going on the app and having a look at. It seems to be very Auckland-centric and not working very well. Okay. And on item 28, the speed interview event, that sounds exciting. Can we go along to that?
Unfortunately, the face-to-face speed interview event has been cancelled. Yes, so you'd be very welcome to come next year, all going well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. This is probably a question for Malcolm. Can you talk about, I heard someone saying that you might be looking at mini marketing plans for areas like Mosgiel and things like that. Can you talk a bit about that?
So I think that comments in relation to the refresh of the destination plan.
Right.
So it's still working through how we're going to manage that process, but the opportunities we think are around community boards having input into those sort of mini destinations, then feeding through to a wider and larger plan.
I think that's a great idea. Well done.
Councillor Elder.
Just a couple of questions. I don't know who this is for because Fraser's not here. Centre of Digital Excellence, you've had the expressions of interests, and I was just wondering what the feedback was on the quality of those ideas.
I'm really pleased about a report that's very high, and at the moment the team are going through and assessing those applications, so we should be able to report back further, in coming meetings as to where those applications have got to.
So what are the next steps for those ones?
Ms O'Brien might be able to answer that more fully, but I would expect that we'll be looking at allocating funding to those that are successful applicants.
The other question I have is we provide local business support and one-on-one support, etc. And with COVID-19, there are a number of businesses under a lot of pressure. So how has the support operated, and how is it operating now, and have you had a huge increase?
Look, there's been a number of ways we've interacted one-on-one with businesses, and I think the tool that has been the most effective has been the Regional Business Partnership Program that is administered by the Otago Chamber of Commerce. So they've been inundated with businesses that have gone through that assessment and assistance program. We've been working with individual businesses around ensuring they get access to those government tools, the funding that's available, providing just a listening ear from time to time, and some of the other forums and funding platforms we've got. We have had quite a comprehensive program of support, some of which was in the answer, I guess, to code, where we've got $700,000 worth of money that we've been putting out to obviously look at getting some gaming companies up and running, additional funding going into the startup Dunedin Trust, just a range of initiatives that are there to really assist local industry.
Thank you. And just one more is to do with education, and wondering how, I suppose, is that appropriate for now? Just just how we're gearing up for over the holidays.
Yeah, probably next paper when we're
Next
looking
paper,
specifically at that.
Sorry.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question around the, I guess it's around the STAP funding and the destination plan. I'm just wondering if that $700,000 will be able to be fast-tracking the update of the destination plan and what the timeline might be around that?
So the timeline for implementing the funding from STAP across all three categories is it's been extended by EMB, so we have 18 months. So in our initial plan, we said the destination plan would be refreshed by June next year, but we have essentially a bit of leeway now, so a little bit hard to answer specifically, but that work's kicking off very shortly.
And will that be a co-design process?
Yeah.
Like, will it go out to consultation with the industry and be worked along with them? When the Dunedin Visitor Strategy was put together, which has the three similar themes, that was done with a steering group with the industry, and I was wondering if the intention is to use that sort of framework for going forward with this.
Sure. I mean, we intend to have extensive consultation across a wide range of stakeholders, and as part of that we're also looking just implemented a residents survey around tourism sentiment. So that's all going to lead into the destination, refresh of the destination management plan.
Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Chanel, this question is specifically for you and your area of expertise in the sense of the unit. Our digital businesses, how are they working through COVID-19 and developed? We see some really strong things here, whether it's code, whether it's the Digital Resilience Program, Tech Week. Then you see articles like Ian Taylor and how ARL were able to change their business model. Instead of sending 11 people offshore, they send 2, and yet they're doing more in that space. Do you have anything to add to what's happening in our tech community, and are they doing well?
Thank you for the question. Yes, just in communication last week with several companies involved in that area, the feedback is quite positive. In fact, it would appear that they are searching for talent because they can see some real advantages and opportunities that this pandemic has provided, particularly those who are perhaps in the online education sector. There are some opportunities offshore that they want to take advantage of. And there are other businesses too that have got interests further offshore as well that are seeking talent and assistance. So there's some growth happening amongst the tech sector in Dunedin, which is very positive.
Are we telling that story strong enough as a council? And I keep thinking back to Mixbit, which is now Blue Jeans, and how they have an office here and they live stream straight through to San Mateo, in the heart of Silicon Valley, and yet it feels like they're working in one office. Then you read that Microsoft purposely brought 20 people to New Zealand to set up a digital office because of our COVID status. And I just see Dunedin has really got that strength, especially with the gig city ability. I do know there's a lot of people already working from home, and I see that our digital footprint across our city is a real advantage. Are we seeing that same? Are we telling that story strong enough as a council?
I think if there's a good story to tell, we should be telling it. So I know in recent weeks we actually had a really good interview with the editor from, I think it was Spin-Off, that's right, the Spin-Off editor, and she came to Dunedin and spent a lot of time with various companies, with people involved in the startup ecosystem and the trust and ourselves. So we were able to put together a pretty full package of stories and anecdotes and information for her. And there'll be quite sort of a list, I think, of stories that's coming through in our work with the marketing team, in fact. So yes, the short answer is yes, that we are starting to build a very good sort of dossier of stories about what's happening in the tech and digital and startup ecosystem in Dunedin. But that's something that we need to continue to work on and celebrate as we continue.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Do I have someone who wishes to move? Councillor Wiley, seconded Councillor Hall. Debate. Councillor Wiley.
No, I just, every time, every meeting we get this sort of update and see what's going on, and we sort of look at actually pre-COVID, post-COVID, whatever it might be, there is a lot of really positive stuff happening around our city, and sometimes I don't think those stories don't quite get out. And we may tell them in Dunedin, but we don't tell them enough nationally, and I get frustrated by that. And then as you read through this report, there is a lot of positives. And yes, we all going to struggle in the current climate. And I know that when I look at retail spending being up at 4.9% to the end of 2nd of August, I don't think there'll be a retailer that's going to be that happy about how August has progressed with the Auckland shutdown. And so we see the effects of COVID, no matter whether you have it or don't have it, but how you move forward as a city, I think, is really important. I thank the team for the work that they're doing, because they are, again, as you can see in this report, the workload is actually quite extensive. And they are ploughing through it as best they can. And I know Malcolm and his team are really doing a good job in trying to hold the tourism sector together as best he can as well. So thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I'm not sure what my colleague was reading, but on page 32 I was very taken with the PR and promotions and the 29 stories in regional and national publications. And then there's the Sydney Morning Herald and the Guardian. So this is a very impressive activity report, and I thank staff for the contribution. But there's one thing that is not noted here that has happened subsequently that I just want to shine a light on. And that is some work, and we talked earlier, Councillor Staines referred earlier to the long game in economic development. And this particular project is just that. And it's we all got advised of it. It's a memorandum of understanding just signed very recently for the 3rd major science and technology research project, which is a collaboration between the University of Otago and Shanghai Mental Health Clinic. And it's for side effects from deep brain stimulation in patients with Parkinson's. And I just wanted to shine a light on it and say it's a real project with real benefits to real people, and I thank the staff who have brought this to fruition.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to share some of the things that other councillors have said as well. I think it's really exciting, some of the things that we're doing in economic development. Particularly around code. I think code's awesome. And I love the Business Vitality Digital Resilience Program idea. I think that's awesome, because there's a lot of people who need help with that digital stuff. And particularly since COVID, I think there's a lot of people that now are realising, what they can do with online stuff. So to pick that up and act with that is really good. I know I've said this before, but I just want to say again that Chanel O'Brien is someone who's often out at events. She's not just someone who comes in, does a report and talks about it. She's regularly out at the functions, the Tech Week stuff, the digital, the entrepreneurial stuff, and I really think she's got her finger on the pulse, and I thank her for her work.
Any other speakers? Councillor Wiley, your right of reply.
I'll just pick up on one point. Yes, I will. Councillor Gary raised the issue about the PR promotions. Yeah, that's a great way of telling Dunedin and what's going on here as a place to visit as such. But I think really point I was trying to make was the fact of the digital footprint of our businesses, the story around our businesses, and living and lifestyle in Dunedin, not just visiting. And I think there's a big part, they sort of work together, but I really have seen a story like Ian Taylor's and how he's grown his business and the digital footprint that he's been able to do from Dunedin. Didn't have to be in Silicon Valley. I think those are the stories that we really need to champion, because that's our next digital wave. It also dies into code and a lot of the other, essentially weightlessness and lack of travel of being able to work here in Dunedin but work globally. So thank you.
I'm going to put it, councillors. All in favour? Against? Carried. On to Study Dunedin Education Update. Margot, welcome to the table. Do you want to speak to anything in your report, or do you just wish to go to questions? Questions, councillors. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Ms Reid, I wonder if you could tell us about the total numbers we currently have of international students in Dunedin.
From the best of our knowledge, we've got about 1,100.
And could you talk about a little bit more? You've touched on pastoral care quite extensively in the report, but could you just go a little bit more in depth to that in terms of the importance of that right now for the young people who are away from their families and the kinds of things that you've been dealing with, or the directors have been dealing with in schools and at the university and Polytech?
Sure. I think the big thing at the moment is that students are coming towards the end of this year and needing to make some quite big decisions about their futures. And they've been away from family, a lot of them who may have seen them last Christmas but may not see them this Christmas, depending on the decisions they make. So especially in the high school space, that's a very difficult time for young people. So there's a lot of extra support that's been put on through the schools, and we are certainly very aware that there are going to be mental health issues and the need for further support to this cohort going forward.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Thank you, Ms Reid. My question is around student wellbeing, also in paragraph 13 of the report, talking to the pilot program focusing on student wellbeing that Study Dunedin is undertaking or supporting. Is the cohort that is supported by that of high school aged students?
That's its aim, although that doesn't preclude tertiary students from being involved in the program as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question was to duplication of effort. I mean, I'm familiar that, although it's been a while since I've been paying close attention, that through the Students' Association and others, whether it's at the Polytechnic or at the university, similar sorts of supports exist for that cohort, but it's not being. But if it's not precluding those people, is there not a risk that we are duplicating effort?
Good question. So the majority of the students that we're hoping will use the iHub, which is the space that is being created, are high school students. But that, obviously it doesn't preclude tertiaries. With the high school students, often when they're at school, they're within their high schools, and they don't often get to mix with other high school students who are internationals. And so we thought it would be nice for them to have a space in the CBD. It would also allow them to integrate better into the community, because that's an area that we've always struggled to find ways for them to make Dunedin really feel like they are part of the wider community. So yes, absolutely, the tertiaries have access to plenty of wellbeing on their campuses. Where we would look for a nice crossover or synergy is in developing tertiary students as mentors for that high school cohort. So their ability to share their experiences between the two cohorts is where we would like to see some interaction.
Thank you. Given that high school aged focus, has there been much discussion with the Youth Council about it? I mean, certainly it's a perennial discussion among young people, the desire for or need for or not physical premises in the city, which we are now making available for international high school aged students. So have they been involved in that work at all?
Not to date, but they are certainly on the list. Where we are in the process at the moment is that we're socialising it with the high schools and the international directors. We certainly think we know what's needed with this space, and we've looked previously to other examples like Melbourne, who do it very well and have a CBD space available for international students to go, and that's been very successful. So we can see internationally it's successful. We just want to ensure that it's going to work in Dunedin, and so the Youth Council is certainly going to be part of those discussions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from other questions around the centrally located space, and as the parent of a secondary school student, I certainly hear what Mayor Hawkins is saying about that availability of space for all. That is, I believe, a challenge for all teenagers and secondary students. I wonder, have you identified a space yet?
So we have contracted a source who is going to provide a space and also whatever goes on in that space, and that company deals in youth and have for the last 10 years in career counselling and in counselling in general. So they've got 5 practitioners that will be part of, so they'll ostensibly work in the space that they find, and then at this stage the plan is that on Friday afternoons that international students will have a space to spend 3 or 4 hours in together, and there'll be opportunities for workshops and things to be run, and that's when mentors will also spend time in that space. So the answer is no, not yet.
Yeah, I guess from a socialisation point of view, as you talk, it would be nice to provide that space to connect with other Dunedin students as well. Obviously we'd like these international students to choose to stay here in a perfect world, and maybe that might be another opportunity to look at as well.
So just to finish that, they have what they call their own mentor squad, and at the moment most of those mentors are Kiwi students from the tertiaries who have been specifically trained in that space.
Councillor Gary.
Ms Reid, I did have another question, which was around paragraph 12 on page 38, and that's around the targeted small cohorts of high value, and I'm very nervous about that expression because I know you've spoken to us before about how sensitive students are, just being thought in terms of their value in monetary terms. But I noted it's postgraduate, and I was interested to know, because we have had master's students, a large number from the USA, which come for a semester, versus students from elsewhere that come for longer periods. Do you know if that focuses on the longer term or the short term? It would seem to me ridiculous to bring people in for short term under that regime.
Yeah. It's actually difficult to tell at this stage. It's certainly been socialised that the high value is not so much in monetary terms, but they've talked in terms of postgraduate because they're talking in terms of their research ability and their ability to contribute to New Zealand in terms of research and what kind of capabilities they can bring in those terms. That doesn't mean specifically that universities would generally consider they'd consider them to be high value, but there's still quite a bit of debate going on about what that actually means.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, and thanks for the report. It's great to see item 13, student wellbeing. And I was just wondering what the school's feedback to you about setting up this program has been. So far, we're just in the middle of socialising that. So
company that we've contracted is actually spending time with schools and students at the moment. There's been a positivity because it's something that they've been looking for previously, and an opportunity for the students to mix more rather than just staying within their school groups. I think most young people benefit from knowing that they're not alone in what they're going through, so their ability to spend time together in a safe space where they know every Friday it's the same space and they've got that opportunity is going to be valuable.
So international students are under a lot of pressure right now, and I think this is great timing for such a thing. And I was just wondering about the summer program and how that's working towards helping these students as well when it comes to support over the break, because many won't be able to go home to their parents.
So we're still in the planning stage, although we're hoping to launch this week, and we'll do so by running an expression of interest, which will allow us to fully develop the program, understanding what the students feel that their needs are going to be over the summer. We've started that concentrating on the high school group first, and the tertiaries are likely at this stage to be developing their own programs, but the high school one is certainly a team effort where we're looking to bring as many people in as we can to ensure that the program is fun, as well as giving them some of the soft skills that they might not normally gain during the school year.
So will that include resilience skills about the pressures they're currently facing?
Yes, so we're going to ensure that we've got people on site during the whole 6 weeks that we'll be running the program who can spend time with them if needed, but some of those programs will run during the afternoon, will be around building their resilience and talking to them about their futures and how that might pan out for them and how their thinking might grow in that space.
I want to thank you for all that work. It's really, really important, so thank you.
Further questions? If not, would someone like to move? Councillor Elder moving, seconded Councillor Gary. Debate?
I just think it is, as we host these international students, it is our duty of care to actually look after them in the wider context, and students at the moment are facing increasing pressure because in fact they cannot go home, or if they do go home, they cannot come. They're worried they cannot come back. So I think that sense of looking after their mental and physical well-being, of them being able to support one another at this time is really critical to their futures and also the minimum we can do when we are a hosting city and we want to welcome and look after these people. So I recommend the work that has been done and will be done over the next few months regarding especially the break over December, January, February. So thank you for that.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge the work, particularly of Ms Reid, over the period from March to May with getting students onto repatriation flights, the work around transport, and the work that is being done looking forward, because parents are sending their young people to our city, and they've done so believing this to be a safe place. That's top of their list when it comes to priorities, and we know that because we've tested that, and we have a situation that is not of their making a very difficult situation, and I'm quite sure that and we also have a moral responsibility that the pastoral care that has been undertaken for the students we have here will in fact stand us in really good stead going forward, and that sends a very clear message to people considering the city as a place in the future future, along with the place that our country's in terms of COVID, we will be in a very strong position in the future, and people won't forget that. So thank you very much for your work.
Further speakers? If not, Councillor Elder, your right of reply.
That's okay.
I'll put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. Items for the chair. Do we have any items for the chair? If not, I will call the meeting to a close. Thank you, everyone.